Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Yes, the sigh is well and truly back because that was a stinker of a performance. That was probably the worst, I think it has to be easily the worst Spurs display of the Postecoglou era. It felt like classic Tottenham Hotspur script writing, didn't it? You know, you go to Villa Park, massive game, loads of pressure, tough venue, resounding win, terrific performance, so many positives to it. Put yourself firmly in the driving seat. And what's that? Tottenham Hotspur want to change that? Oh, okay, yeah, we can mess it up 6 days later and just go the short distance across London and, you know, put in the most, like I say, disappointing performance of the season. It's like the reverse of the Al Pacino moment in Godfather Part 3. It is. Do you remember that moment in Godfather Part 3 when he says, you know, just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in, kind of thing. I don't know who the hell that was supposed to sound like. It was allegedly Al Pacino. This was like the opposite. It was like, just when I think they've pulled me back in, they kind of chew me up, spit me out and throw me away. And that really is the way with Spurs sometimes. Yeah, it was a poor performance. I mean, very little kind of positive. Weirdly, it was still a poor performance, yet in the first half, there were about 3 decent chances Spurs could have taken to completely change the course of the game, probably. It was disappointing. That's the first time I've seen Postecoglou really disappointed with his team and disappointed with the way they acted, reacted, everything, you know, in between as well. I should stress, look, if you're coming here for a video where expecting someone to essentially massively overreact, slate everything, call for the head of the manager, want everything chucked out the door once again, I'm sorry, this is not probably going to be the video for you. I'm definitely going to look at a lot of the negatives and things that needs to change and bits of that performance that were just absolutely shocking in some aspects. But I'm also well aware that this is a rebuild. It really is. And it's a rebuild with a young team. And with that sort of kind of setup and construction or reconstruction of a team, you're going to have days like that, as disappointing as it was and as they are when you see that. But it just is. You're going to have these really rubbish days at the office. It's going to happen. You know, we all want a rebuild, and I'm just as guilty as everyone else of wanting a rebuild, but then you kind of get the elements of what a rebuild constitutes and the bad parts of it, and you're like, oh, I didn't really want that. And that's why, yeah, you are going to get absolutely naff days like that. You know, you've got to put it into context. I mean, what is it? Spurs won, I saw the stat earlier today, saying like they've won 8 of their past 13 Premier League games. They've only lost 3 of them. I think that was only their 3rd away defeat of the season, the Spurs. You know, it's not this horrendous end of the world performance that I think some people are kind of trying to make out. It was just a really poor day, and it's going to happen. And it was the first time for me where the team have really kind of strayed away from what Postecoglou wants them to do. And I think he essentially said that after the game as well. First time they really didn't show any of the required levels to make his football work. But, yeah, it isn't the end of the world. Villa's draw at West Ham today has also kind of just about kept it in Spurs' hands. You know, bearing in mind they're 3 points behind, 1 behind in the goal difference. So they would have to win the game in hand by more goals than Villa, of course. But it is kind of there. But as Postecoglou says, and we've got quotes to come, so much of the season left. You know, 10 games left is a huge amount of games in terms of the business end of a season. But yeah, this isn't going to be a video where it's all going to be woe is us, woe is Spurs, why are we always so awful, all of this sort of stuff. And the manager, I've genuinely seen people saying the manager has to go. That is mind-boggling. I mean, how long do managers get now? You know, when they've got to do a rebuild. I mean, especially in a manager where you've seen so much kind of good stuff happen in the past 8 months as well. And so many players develop and improve. And this was the thing, wasn't it, in previous managers? We were kind of scratching around for which player has improved, which player's done this, which player's done that. How have they kind of improved what, you know, they were when they arrived or whatever. And I don't have that issue with the Postecoglou era. There's so many players that I look at and think, wow, what a excellent player they're becoming, kind of thing. And yeah, I do think people kind of forget the whole Spurs did sell their best player at the start of the season. As a player that the entire team was built around. And look, it's all there on social media, those kind of the predictions people were making. What would happen to Spurs without Harry Kane? What would happen with a massive rebuild needing to be done? And I do think, I still maintain it, the start of the season, I think, got people a little bit more excited. Had it been a kind of a bit of an up and down from the start of the season, maybe, I don't know, maybe we would have kind of seen this as the transition rebuild season it is. Whereas because it started so well, I still feel like, I say started so well, like I just said, they won 8 of their last 13 in the Premier League. Look, there are gripes to be had, absolutely. I'm totally not saying people shouldn't be frustrated or annoyed at what happened. And some aspects of playing some games, it's still not the finished article. Spurs are still not putting in consistent performances across 90 minutes. Although, I was about to say Villa. Yeah, there was parts in the first half against Villa that wasn't amazing, but overall I think it was quite a consistent performance in terms of the effort levels and everything else. But again, it's a young team. This is what happens with young teams. Funnily enough, I had some of the reporters at the game yesterday. There was some that normally report on Arsenal, and I was kind of talking to them about the kind of parallels, I guess, between the Arsenal side under Arteta in its first few seasons and where Spurs are at now under Postecoglou. And a lot of them could see the similarities. They could see games when there's terrific football and they're tearing people apart, and then other games where they look a little bit lost and look a little bit static and kind of not entirely sure what to do against teams that kind of set up well against them. And I thought that was quite interesting, just kind of getting a different perspective. I mean, we saw it obviously firsthand with the Pochettino era at Spurs and the way that kind of had its peaks and troughs, and there was progression, but there were also games when we would kind of complain about their inability to break down teams that would sit back and things like that. It's just what happens with young teams being built. It really is. And I do find it incredible that, 8 months in, we've got people just saying, like, chuck this one as well, move on to the next one. I'd be fascinated to know who's the next manager, who's the next person they'd want to kind of bring in. It always seems to be a reaction, but maybe not a solution. And I mean, look, it was annoying, and it was, like I say, the classic Tottenham script. But this is not a Spurs in rebuild that are in the bottom half of the table, as some predicted. I saw some people, predicting relegation without Harry Kane. This is a team that have got the top 4 still in their own hands. Yes, they made a mess of it yesterday. That's the irony. You can't really say, they're always going to go into a situation and bottled it, because they went to Villa Park, played very well in a high pressure game, and came away with it. And this is a team that has not been beaten in the Premier League by City, Liverpool, Arsenal, Man United, some of these big teams. Yet, yes, they've gone and they've lost to the likes of Fulham, Wolves a couple of times, West Ham, Brighton away was, had some really poor moments in it as well. That's the up and down. That's exactly what you're going to get with a young team in a rebuild. Unfortunately, you've got to take the rough with the smooth to begin with. And hopefully it gets to where you want it to be. And again, it's not like Postecoglou didn't warn everyone. He did say in the first season, especially when they're taking on a very different style of football, it takes a while. It does, and there will be people doubting it. There will be, people saying that, where's the plan B? Where's the different ways of playing and all that? And it's interesting because a lot of the kind of the top managers out there have a very set style of play that they don't abandon their principles either. But obviously they've kind of done it in the big leagues and they've got that kind of reputation behind them to be able to do that, I guess. Whereas maybe when someone like Postecoglou does it, people don't quite rate what he's come from compared to those kind of managers. It's fascinating the way we kind of all see football in different ways as well. And I think another thing that happens, and this is particularly pertinent, I think, for me when it comes to the Villa and Fulham night and day performances, quite literally one was in the day, one was in the night, is that with young teams, there's an overconfidence after a big result. They'll go into the next game truly believing in themselves and what they've done, and then they'll go into the next game almost expecting it to be the same, and they forget what brought the previous result. The fighting, the momentum, the motivation, the endeavour, the kind of risk-taking as well in moments, but also the quality required in those risk-taking moments. And yeah, everything that was good about the performance at Villa Park, they pretty much abandoned it at Fulham. And you can understand the frustration, really. There was no intensity. There was no clinical edge to what they did. There was no real cohesion or discipline. Discipline was a big thing for me, and some of the positioning taken up, especially in the midfield. The midfield for me was the biggest disappointment of the day. It really was for me. It was an awful. The midfield three were, and that's a midfield three that did so well again at the start of the season, but they abandoned almost everything that they did well at the start of the season, and they did well at Villa Park as well. And I felt like the whole kind of performance hinged on that, because you had midfielders all over the place. You had midfielders having to cover huge amounts of space because the other two were away. You had them coming across to the left and right to help out, leaving these massive gaps through the middle. You could have driven a couple of double-decker buses through. And Fulham profited from it. You know, they played well, Fulham. They were very impressive in certain aspects. The irony of this probably being Spurs' worst performance this season, Marco Silva said afterwards, it was Fulham's best performance this season. They were really good, Fulham, and I think they kind of deserve credit, especially for that aspect of things. Yeah, weirdly, I had Hugh Grant was sat just kind of in the row in front of us in the press box. Big Fulham fan. I didn't actually realise that. Apparently goes home and away games as well whenever he can. And that was just kind of a surreal moment. That was probably the most interesting part of the day for me, which is kind of summed up the performance on the pitch, was seeing Hugh Grant. You know, and he wasn't he in Wonka recently as an Oompa Loompa, and this was more wonky, the Wonka from Spurs. Everything was a little askew. It wasn't really how it was meant to be. Yeah, really, really, really poor. Postecoglou said Spurs were careless on the ball, too keen to get forward, and they didn't have the conviction to kind of back that up. And this is the irony, you know, people kind of saying you can't just do this all-out attack constantly. And it wasn't really what Postecoglou wanted. He actually said those words, you know, too keen to get forward. Yeah, it was. It was a really bad day at the office. Probably the worst day at the office this season. I'd say the game at Molineux was a poor one, but I would say it probably had more elements to cling to than this one does. I mean, they were a couple of minutes away from winning at Spurs until they threw it away at the end. And obviously that was a makeshift team as well. It had Davies and Dyer, didn't it, in central defence as well. And this one, for me, it was a near full-strength team, and that probably made it even more disappointing. Yeah, I asked Postecoglou afterwards about, like, why do you think they couldn't harness the momentum from the Villa game properly and use it in the right way? He was not having it. He was not having it at all. He said, I don't buy into that sort of stuff. It's a very different game. It's a different challenge. It's not like you start this game a goal up because you won last week. I think if you fall into that trap of thinking that what you did last week is going to help you this week, it just doesn't work this way. And he's right. He is right. I do think there's still a case for the kind of the momentum aspect of things. You know, you can take the motivation into it with you. You can take that belief in yourself into it. But of course, as I said before, you've got to back that up with making sure you still do the same things you did the previous week. If anything, I guess that's what I'm kind of trying to say, that you had the blueprint of which to follow, and why would you not follow that? He said, to be fair to the players, it's the first time this year where I felt, especially in the second half, that we just didn't, well, we're in the position we are because every week we've been really, really competitive in every aspect of the game. And even in our losses, I felt that we've hit certain markers in terms of our endeavour and competitiveness. And I thought that it was missing today, and that was disappointing. Sonny went even stronger. Sonny's interview after, I've said this in previous videos, Sonny has been a very vocal leader since taking the armband. He's not afraid to kind of say exactly where he thinks the team or himself have gone wrong. And he said, it's very disappointing, very frustrating. Everyone has to look in the mirror and say, it is my fault. And this is what he said to Sky. It was not good enough. We didn't put in the effort we have put in this season. The performance, the attitude was not good enough. Everybody needs a big wake-up call. In the Premier League, if you're not ready, you get punished. Aston Villa are an amazing team, but so are Fulham. If you're not given 100%, including me, you get punished. You don't get 3 points for free. We had to put a lot of effort in to get 3 points, but we didn't do it. This is 2 steps backwards. We now need to make a strong step forward. It is unacceptable, including me, it was unacceptable. We're representing Premier League teams. We are representing Tottenham Hotspur. This was not close to what we have been doing this season. It's very sad to watch this and to get a result like that. Also, the fans don't deserve this. They're coming here after 4-0 win at Villa with positive energy and good vibes. Losing this way is very tough. The players are very down, which is normal. And like I said, Fulham do deserve credit. I hate it when I go on a little kind of rant about Spurs and the way they played and end up not giving enough credit to the opposition, because Fulham are very good. A lot of good players in their team. I thought Robinson was excellent down the flank. I thought he was superb. I thought Muniz was very good as well. This is a team that aren't a walkover. This is why maybe it's even more annoying that any Spurs players might have thought they would go there and stroll through it. Because, Fulham have beaten Arsenal, Man United, they've beaten Brighton, and 3 really tight matches against Liverpool this season as well, in the Carabao Cup and the league. They were never going to be a walkover at all. Marco Silva's done a really good job there. But yet you look at it and you're struggling to see what Spurs players really stood up to it and knew what they had to do. Christian Romero, I think, was probably one of the ones that can't come away with too much. He can maybe have some positives about his performance that you can take away with him, I guess. He had, I've got his stats, 3 tackles, 3 interceptions, 3 clearances, and he blocked 2 shots. So, for me, the best defender on the night in the Spurs team. But I guess as the experienced head, the World Cup winner, probably his responsibility to be organising that backline, which was a lot of it. It was all over the place at times. And the other one, maybe, who I think you could probably give a little bit more credit to of the starting players, was Guillermo Vicario. Saved Spurs a few times in the first half with smart stopping crosses coming in. But I guess even for him, conceded 3 goals on the night. Could have been a 4th, obviously. It was offside, and you can understand why it was ruled out, the 4th one. But, he was unfortunate with the 3rd goal as well. It kind of hit the post, hit him, and then went across the face of goal. He posted on Instagram, not much to say. Today we were not good enough. You deserve better from us. We will be back. Romero did a post today that was kind of along similar lines. There's a real, which I think is good, a disgust with the performance from the players. You can tell that as well. They know that it was just absolutely horrendous. It's just a shame that it's international break. Spurs have done this before. This is not the first time they've gone into a break. They did it when I think it was both Wolves games. I think they had the Chelsea postponed game, so they had a 2-week break for that. And then I think it was the international break as well back in maybe November. I'm trying to remember what it was, when they just went into these weeks. And it's just a stinker for the fans that have got 2 weeks to kind of be just annoyed with Spurs. It's rubbish for me because I've got 2 weeks to write about Spurs with very little kind of positive stuff in that aspect to take from it. It just wasn't good enough. And like I say, Romero and Vicario are probably the only 2 for me that can come away with it with kind of their heads held high, but ultimately as a defender and a goalkeeper, you conceded 3 goals. So you're probably not going to be walking away with any kind of real satisfaction from the game either. Everyone else was pretty much dreadful across the board. Obviously, they've lost this 30, and this is obviously not the be-all and end-all of it. The points are the most galling thing to lose, but they have obviously brought an end to the 39-game scoring streak in the Premier League. That is done, finished with, the end. And like I say, midfield for me, a lot of everything went to die in that midfield. Every kind of good thing kind of felt like it just collapsed in the midfield area. And what was annoying was that midfield was so effective at Villa Park, but it was so ineffective at Craven Cottage just 6 days later. for me, Pat Matasar and James Madison just went wandering. They were just off and all over the place and their passing was poor. I did feel for Basuma. I didn't think he played well, but it was so many times when I looked up and he was on his own, having to kind of come across to maybe try to cover the space that either Sarr or Porro had left. And you look and it was just these huge oceans of space for the Fulham players to just go through the midfield. He was very much overloaded so many times. And yeah, Sarr and Madison, who both obviously combined for that terrific first goal at Villa, they were just poor. And again, this is going back to, especially with Sarr, the young player aspect of it, the inconsistency of the performances. Sarr so good against Villa. He was awful against Craven Cottage. There were little moments he had, like some chasing down and pressing. He created a chance for himself that he just couldn't quite sort his feet out to have a good effort with. But his passing, 67.7% pass success rate, which was the lowest of any outfield player starting the game. It was just like a really erratic performance. And Madison as well, he had a shot, didn't he, that he put wide of the left-hand post, and he set up Sonny for an effort as well. That's pretty much it. That's all I can remember from the game, really, from those two moments. They were just wandering so much. And to leave Basuma, who's just not in the kind of form right now where he can kind of be dominating and make the best decisions, you can't leave in those scenarios. He's just got so many. I don't know if it's internal doubts in his mind because of the red cards he's had and letting the team down this season, or obviously he's had malaria just before the Africa Cup of Nations started. I don't know, but this is not the full Basuma we're getting right now. So yeah, to overload him right now, it's not going to do him any favours at all. Sarr with his mobility is going to be so key to kind of providing that engine room player, the player that can be up one end of the pitch and back the other, whereas just felt like yesterday he just kept getting stuck up the pitch so many times. And Madison, is he quite, in a position to really be as sharp and dominating games as he was? I don't know. He had a little bit of a kind of a niggle injury-wise in the week during training. I don't think it really helped him when it came to the game, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, he could have done more. I felt in that game. I actually felt Spurs looked better when Kulusevski moved into his role, and that says a lot because Madison has been so good. His stats bear that out this season, but still not quite at the sharpness we need him to be, really. And obviously behind them, we were missing Mickey van der Ven. Obviously, Mickey van der Ven is a key ingredient of that defence. He is such a vital building block. His pace allows Spurs to squeeze the opposition far higher up the pitch. It prevents the opposition from kind of playing the ball around in those midfield areas because he can kind of just sneak in there and intercept it and take it away. But yeah, Fulham just kind of had the run of their own pitch for so long. They 16 shots at goal to Spurs 14. I think a lot of Spurs came later on as well. 7 on target for Fulham, 5 for Spurs. And interestingly, I know it's a random kind of thing to pick up, but I often notice that the amount Spurs pen in teams means that the opposition have so many clearances. The clearance numbers for opposition teams against Spurs are always huge. And I think you could see that without Van der Ven, they weren't penning them in. It's not just on Van der Ven, as Postecoglou said afterwards in one of his interviews. But it is also about the quality of the passing to keep the other team penned in. But looking at the clearances, where is it? I had it down here somewhere. Fulham only made 8. Spurs had to make 20 clearances, plus making 6 blocks to shots to Fulham's 1. And it just showed the difference. Look, Radu Dragusin came in for his first start for the club. Wasn't the greatest. It wasn't the greatest debut. I've seen some people kind of sticking up for him a lot, and that's great. I'd rather see that because there's a long way to go, and it was his first ever start. He is still only 22 years old. Yes, I know Van der Ven is as well, but Van der Ven's had 8 months to adapt to the Premier League and English football. I just felt Dragusin looked like a young player getting to grips with a very different and difficult kind of league opponent. He showed composure in some moments, I felt, early in the game, and actually, to his credit, felt later in the game. After Spurs had conceded 3 goals, I actually felt he didn't let it really knock him, and that's a big thing. Postecoglou said in the week that he's got like really big self-confidence, Dragusin. But look, he's not going to be Van de Ven. Van de Ven is the fastest player in the Premier League's history. Dragusin is no slouch. He's got a turn of pace, but he's not going to be that ridiculous lightning quick speed that Van de Ven brings behind. That meant, obviously, he's going to have to do a little bit more defending on the back foot. He was caught out a couple of times by Fulham's play. He didn't actually make a single tackle on the day at all, Dragusin. He did manage 2 interceptions and 5 clearances, as well as blocking 2 shots. First goal, it was a terrific ball from Anthony Robinson. It really was, picking out Muniz at the back post. Back post, the back of the area. But I think if I'm Dragusin and I'm looking back at that, I'm thinking I've kind of lost Muniz behind me. He left him with far too much space. That wasn't great. It just kind of shows you the Premier League, just even the smallest of errors, just giving someone that tiny bit extra room, it just punished so quickly in the Premier League. Second goal, I'd maybe put that more on Destiny Udogie. Destiny Udogie kind of rushed out. He was easily dribbled past. I think it was Iwobi got past him. The ball was then knocked into Castagna, who just whipped it across. Dragusin had come across, left a big space in behind him. He was trying to cover Udogie. I think Johnson came back and didn't put in a particularly great kind of blocking effort. He just kind of stood there. So there's a big space in behind Dragusin and Sasa Lukic. Just one of those where you could say, it's lucky it deflected off his knee, but I think it was one of those where he was just trying to get any part of his body against it to deflect it in, divert it in. And he did, straight in the far corner. Third goal, again, all 3 goals kind of came eventually from the right-hand side of Spurs' penalty area, which of course is from right-hand side, from Fulham's side, which is Dragusin and Udogie's side. And obviously you've got the other aspect of Dragusin not, I guess, being naturally left-footed, although Postecoglou, when I've mentioned this once, very much doesn't believe in that. He believes that any right-sided centre-back should be able to play on the left and vice versa. But the third goal, it kind of bounced around, didn't it? Was it from a corner? I think Calvin Bassey had the shot, turned, hit the post, hit Vicario, went across the goal or the 6-yard box, and I guess Dragusin just not quite as switched on as Muniz was. Managed to kind of he almost kind of booted Muniz into the ball. It was a tough full debut for him, Dragusin. It just kind of showed these little moments that can become so big if you're not quite as switched on as you need to be. Like I say, he did good stuff. There were good moments. There were some lovely little turns that he did when he took the ball away. There was some good interceptions and clearances. But he will get better. Not every player is going to look incredible in their first game. It just doesn't work like that. For every Van de Ven and Udogie who looked terrific in their opening games, you've got someone like a Pedro Porro, who was, horrendous, or it was a horrendous debut for him against Leicester last year, but yet he went on, has gone on to be very good, although he wasn't good yesterday. Dejan Kulusevski, by his own admission, dreadful in his first game or two, but then the rest of that season was incredible. So, I genuinely, again, have seen some people writing Dragusin off after one start. It does terrify me, football fandom today, and what it has become. It is such a very strange entity. It really is. It is the way people's brains go, and how there's almost a desire to be angry. So when something happens that goes against what you want, it kind of lets you outpour everything you've wanted to say, regardless of whether it kind of suits exactly the scenario or not. And it's fascinating. I'd love to kind of go back in a time machine and just see what football fans were like, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years ago after a defeat. Was it the same levels of hysteria and kind of, or is that just a modern thing and maybe social media's played its part? I don't know. Postecoglou was asked about Dragishin afterwards. He didn't really want to go down the individual route. He said, I don't think it's a game to talk about individuals because whether it's Radu's first game or Sonny's 500th, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that as a group, we just didn't reach the levels we need to in order to compete. So for us, there's obviously a lesson in that. It's part of our growth. You've got to feel all these things I keep saying. They're not first, but they're things you've got to go through if you want to get growth, and it's how you react to them, and that's our challenge now. Like I say, Porro and Udogie I didn't think were very good at all. Who Scored, which does stat-based rankings rather than kind of what you see, based purely on the numbers and what they do. Porro only got a 5.96, which was one of the lowest. I think only Sarr, 5.72, and Brennan Johnson, 5.81, got lower. Udogie was only a tiny bit better, 6.02. And Porro obviously just got back in the Spain squad. He should be absolutely buzzing, but he was off it. Like I say, Udogie was pretty much walked by Iwobi for the second goal. Neither fullback I felt really offered a lot of threat going forward. I think Udogie was it maybe Udogie that set up Madison's chance, but wasn't really a lot going on. Wasn't a lot for them to be happy about in their performances, and they kind of got pulled apart all over the place when Fulham were going down their flanks as well. But then look, none of the forwards covered themselves in glory. I thought Brennan Johnson, after having been really good in recent games and really making an impact, this was probably one of his weaker games. Had a weak first half shot at goal, I remember that. 2 key passes, one of which was the ball right across the face of goal that I still don't know how Timo Verna managed to miss. So, he could have ended the game with an assist. The irony was Verna was quite bright when he came on. I thought Verna really ran at them and did cause them problems. But that was a horrendous miss. All he had to do was almost push it in, and he kind of tried to place it in, and it just it was pretty dreadful. I'd probably say it was the Spurs fans were in more danger from Verna than Bernd Leno's goal. There was one really awkward moment when the Spurs fans got out Save Our Seniors banner because of the season ticket stuff, and were kind of holding it up, trying to make their point. And Verna sliced a shot so badly it almost hit the Spurs fans that were holding that banner. It was pretty much summed up the day, and it summed up Verna. It's again one of those things where give him no time to think, and he will bury his shot. Give him a moment to really digest what's happening around him. He kind of makes a mess of it, and it's a shame because he's got so many elements to be a really good player. Like I say, we've seen it at Leipzig, but he's just got to. I guess it's the mental aspect, I suppose, isn't it? It's putting those thoughts to the back of your mind rather than letting them be front and centre. And that moment when he sliced it, I just could see it. I was thinking, don't hit the banner. He didn't. But there is no evidence, by the way, that Daniel Levy paid him to take that shot towards the banner. As far as I'm aware, there's nothing in that. He wasn't alone, to be honest. All of the attack were poor. Sonny had a tough game. He only touched the ball 45 times. Only Madison 43 and Sarr 39 touched it less. He did try to make things happen. He had 4 dribbles, 1 key pass and 2 shots off target. But he also lost the ball a few times, lost it 3 unsuccessful touches he had. And the service around him was pants. To be the central striker and have so little the ball into your feet said a lot as well. You could see he was frustrated out there that he couldn't influence the game. Kulusevski, for me, he's in this kind of little dangerous area right now of inheriting a little bit of the Lucas Moura trait of beating a man and you're like, yes, nice. And then he kind of turns inside and tries to beat another man or a third man and loses it to them. And it's been a real trait of recent games with him. Look, he did really well against Villa. He can be really devastating when he makes the right decisions. He had, he was involved in 3 of the 4 goals at Villa Park. But you can tell when he's having a day when he's a bit more hesitant in his decision making, he looks that little bit more lumbering and predictable. Whereas when his brain is sharp and he's really making the clever choices, he can dominate that right hand side. I was trying to think if anyone else deserved any credit. subs came on and did okay. It wasn't just Verna. I thought Højbjerg was quite good when he came on. Again, with the caveat that Fulham had kind of taken their foot off the gas a bit. But I did feel like he looked a world away from Basuma. I thought he looked much better and more disciplined. I thought Bentancur was okay when he came on, quite reasonably bright. And like I say, Verna was more dangerous than Johnson was down the left. Richarlison came on, was a bit of a threat, had a couple of opportunities, but it couldn't kind of get the ball in the net. I mean, if you're Postecoglou, would you start Højbjerg next game against Luton? Would you bring him into it? It's difficult because Højbjerg is not the future of Tottenham Hotspur. We know he's going to be going this summer. He's got a year left in his deal, and it looks like all signs are pointing towards the exit. So is bringing him in a short-term measure and going against your principles? Or is it something that's become necessary because maybe Basuma is just out of form right now? Or do you play Bentancur in there? Bentancur as the number 6 hasn't been entirely successful this season. It is a difficult one. I think, obviously, a post-international match, a post-international break match is always a really difficult one to know what the team's going to look like because players come back with little knocks and problems, or they're tired, they've had long travels. So it may be that it changes naturally because of that, but you would think you have to change it up. You would think that just a couple of tweaks have to be made. Obviously, much will depend on training as well in those few days before the game. But I don't know. We'll see. I mean, do you bring Richarlison back in? It's a really difficult one with Richarlison. Richarlison has had a good season compared to last season. He had 10 Premier League goals this season, which is good. He's been a lot improved since he had the surgery. I think it's really freed him up. But it's difficult still, I feel, at this point to see him as the long-term option through the centre for Spurs. I'm not sure I see that yet. I'm not sure I see enough growth in his game at this point. And, there's continued links to Saudi clubs. And if they were to come in with a big bid, would Spurs maybe say, okay, being good is a good squad option, but can we turn down that sort of money if it is a big bid that the betters or matches even maybe the 60 million? I don't know if you'd take it if it matches. It's a difficult one. I know there's some fans out there would say, yeah, I'd take the money back on him. But he is a confidence player. He could well start against Luton, get a goal or two, and suddenly he's back to where he was. It's some very good games this season. But you kind of look like to the future and you look at who maybe would Spurs look to. Spurs will sign a striker this summer. They have to. They need another number 9. They haven't naturally replaced Kane. I know that's near impossible task, but at least someone that is of that mould. Ivan Toney, of course, is going to be a big one, I think, for a lot of clubs this summer. Only got a year left on his contract, so it's not going to be the ridiculous figures we're kind of seeing for him. Various Premier League sides are going to look at Santiago Jimenez, the guy that's at Feyenoord, isn't it, in the Eredivisie. Mexico international, he's got 21 goals in 24 matches. Yes, I know some people say you can't really judge it on the Dutch division, but he has also got 2 goals and assists in 4 Champions League matches this season, so he's a decent player. I mean, even Muniz, he's kind of come not quite from nowhere, but he's come off the back of a difficult loan at Middlesbrough last year. And this season, I think he's got 7 in his last 7 Premier League matches. He only had 18 touches of the ball yesterday, but he made it count. It reminded me a little bit of Sonny at the Emirates earlier in the season, who barely touched the ball, but just what he did was so efficient with it. Muniz, whether he's easy to prize away from Fulham this summer is a different thing. But I did like the look of him. I thought his movement was really nice. Again, very early days for him, and would you kind of spend big money on someone that maybe isn't proven for a long period of time yet? But yeah, I just feel like that's a position where he needs another big option there. Someone that is a natural number 9, not just someone that can move it out from the wing to play in the centre. You look at some of the agents there involved. Ivan Toney. He is represented by, I think he's he's CAA Stella, obviously, which have quite a big presence within Spurs. You got, who's at Stella? You had Bale, you got Roden, you got Davies. I think Lloyd Kelly they were looking at, I think was Stella as well. Muniz is base, who do have a massive kind of obviously stable of players at Spurs. But I guess that's all for the summer. Right now, Postecoglou's got to sort out kind of some of the attacking issues that there were in this game. That was one of the most disappointing things. The midfield was the most thing for me. I kind of felt the defence was disappointing, but it was mainly dealing with the issues that come from the midfield. Like I say, the first real kind of game where he's seen Postecoglou, the players, not turn up for him and not do what he wanted them to do. At the moment, it's just a one-off. So, we can't get too carried away and say it's part of some larger thing or a pattern or a theme or anything. It's really one game where they've just been dreadful from start to finish. And like I say, still had 2 or 3 decent chances that could have turned the game. Postecoglou clearly wasn't happy. His interview with the club, the Spurs play one, lasted 51 seconds. Nuno must be thinking, see? It's okay. You can speak for barely any time. I don't know whether it was chopped or what, or whether that was just it, but it was very, very short. He didn't get so lucky with us in the press conference. We kept him for about 7 minutes or so. He was a little bit exasperated, I think, by some of the line of questioning. And then obviously he's got this big thing right now about top 4 and not wanting to be kind of sucked into the whole narrative of the top 4. He was asked whether it concerned him, the lack of intensity in the game. And he said, no, it's not worrying. It's just disappointing. I'd be worried if it was our 5th game in a row where we did that, but it's disappointing and we need to analyse it. That's where we're at with all of those things. You've got to try to treat it in isolation to make sure you don't fall into the trap of one way or the other, whether that's positive or negative, going down rabbit holes that don't exist. He was asked what he told the players after the game. He said, no different to any other game. It's about continual growth and continual development. That's never just a straight line. You're going to cop hits along the way, and we've copped one today, and we've just got to make sure that we bounce back. He was kind of protecting of his players in the whole, while also saying they knew they didn't reach the levels he asked of them. In terms of Postecoglou, it's a difficult one. Yeah, it's really easy to just come out with he could have made subs earlier, he could have reacted better to things that were going on. But ultimately, he's kind of got to show trust in these players. This is kind of part of his thing as well. It's showing them belief, and they let him down. He couldn't have done much about those actual players out there. That was... I sort of, I put the team lineup out before the game, and I saw a lot of people that I'm really happy with that. That's a strong lineup. That's the team that I probably would have picked. All of this. Then those players go out there and just stink the place out. Could he have reacted a bit quicker on the touchline? Maybe. Maybe you could have brought Højbjerg or Bentancur in a little bit earlier when it wasn't working through the middle of the park. Perhaps could you have brought Verna on when Johnson or Kulusevski was struggling to get through? I don't know how fit Richarlison would have been to come in a little bit earlier. I don't know. It's just so easy, I guess, in hindsight to say these things. He's changed the game in quite a few matches. How many times we've said a sub has come on and changed the game. Johnson, especially in some of the recent weeks, is coming in and making a difference. Verna coming off the bench and scoring a couple of days back. And there's been other games where he's tweaked it as well. Remember Man U, Old Trafford, that was a game. Was it Man U at Old Trafford? Was it that game? It was definitely a game where he tweaked things as well, and they are kind of on the whole a lot better in the second halves, but they weren't in this one. I felt they got worse after this half time this time. And I kind of got the impression that he felt that as well. And he was, like I say, pushing this whole 4th place shouldn't be the target. And I get it. I understand. Look, I'm going to read out his quotes for you because he probably went into the most detail in this one because he was a bit fed up, you could see, with the question. He said, look, I just don't see fourth as the prize. This club has finished fourth before. It's finished second before. You can throw all types of things at it. It's reached a Champions League final. Bear in mind, he's very much talking about the Premier League here. I'm sure he knows that they've won the league in the past. You can throw all types of things at it. It's reached a Champions League final. You can throw all sorts of things, but this club has achieved things. So fourth is not my end goal. I don't want to finish fourth if we haven't grown as a team and developed as a team. If no one believes me, that's fine. Part of the narrative is to push you in these kind of positions where you think that fourth is some kind of achievement that gives you something for next year. It doesn't give you anything unless, let's say, fourth would be great if I feel like we're growing as a team and we're creating something that is going to bring us success next year. But fourth is not our goal. It hasn't been. It's not my goal. It certainly isn't my goal, but I get it from the outside, particularly in their Premier League. It seems like people push you into that position where you succeed or fail just on an outcome. I just don't think that's how you get success. Success is built on, I think, more tangible stuff. If we finish fifth and I think we've got a team to challenge next year, then I won't be disappointed. And look, there is a big, healthy dollop of logic, I think, to what he's saying. I understand large kind of sections of it. The mere presence of being in the Champions League is not an indicator that your club's moving in the direction or even that it's ready to deal with it. We've seen that, as he said the other day, with Man U and Newcastle. They were not able to cope with the Premier League, Champions League this season. And I would say also a lot of the teams that have gone on to kind of try to shake up the hierarchy of the Premier League have done so from a position of not having Champions League football. If anything, those who have had Champions League football on their belt to contend with as well, on their plate, have not been able to kind of mix it with the big boys. We've seen that in some of it. So I get what he's saying. I also agree with the kind of assertion that it's not the most important thing, a guarantee of signing better players. I think it maybe was back in the day. I don't think with the money that is in the Premier League, it still quite holds that same weight. I would actually say that Spurs' probably most successful signings of recent years have come in the summers when they haven't had Champions League football on the to offer up to them. So I don't really think that kind of makes a big difference. Even if you look at this season, Spurs have signed players ahead of Bayern Munich and Barcelona, despite the fact that Bayern and Barcelona, all but guaranteed a place in the Champions League next season. So I don't think that's key to that. I should very much stress, don't worry, this is not me saying we don't want fourth, we don't need fourth. That's not what I'm saying. I'm trying to argue where his logic does definitely fit. I think Champions League football, so the money it brings in is helpful for the club, but it's not, again, the be-all and end-all, especially at a club that has created such a cash-generating stadium, which I think we'll see in the financial reports when they come out before the end of this month for the club. It shouldn't be the biggest thing for his transfer budget this summer. I don't feel like that should, again, be a huge thing that decides what it is. The one thing I would say is that I do feel like players need a target. I remember in Conte's first season when he refused to kind of put any real targets on what he wanted them to do. And then suddenly, there came a point in the season, maybe it was around this period, 10 games ago, I can't remember exactly when it was, when he suddenly said, we're going for the top four. He said, I've decided to put this target on the players. I feel like they're ready for it, and I feel they need it to drive them. That's my only fear with the way that Postecoglou is saying this right now, is that, there's a danger in taking the pressure off them so much that defeats and bad performances don't mean quite as much. That's my only fear with it. Look, Postecoglou may well point to the fact that Conte setting that target and getting Champions League qualification meant nothing because the next season his team absolutely fell apart. And he wasn't able to sustain it, whether that's through bigger reasons, whether that's the club, the hierarchy, whether he was backed or not, however you want to put it. But yeah, it's I guess Postecoglou will say he's trying to look to build something a bit more longer term. Although, obviously, the irony is he probably stays at clubs for not that much longer than Conte does if you look at his career. Differing reasons for that, and that may change, I don't know, with Spurs. But, yeah, for him, it's more about what he can build as a platform for next season and what he can build as, just for the following seasons to come, really. And it is kind of what he's done everywhere he's gone. The first season has been a bit rocky. It has been laying a foundation for what's to come. He's needed 2 or 3 transfer windows, and then his teams have gone on. And Celtic's a bit different. Celtic, it's a slightly different scenario there because I guess the quality of some in the league, but also being in a position where you already are one of the best teams, if not the best team in the league. But yes, still, it can be done. You can build a team that kind of takes on the rivals in a slightly different way. Excuse me. Obviously Pochettino did it over his peak years at the club. That lot down the road, I guess they've kind of proved as well with a young team, you can kind of build it, and it might not be great to begin with. Obviously, they had the bonus of getting an FA Cup or 2, which is a huge thing, I think, in terms of the happiness of the fans, although those Arsenal fans were still looking, I think, for Arteta to go at one point. And I think they've shown this season that they've consolidated it. They're in a title race again, yet they're also in the quarterfinals of the Champions League. And yes, they did make a big signing in terms of a £100 million signing with Declan Rice. It's a difficult one because, I think if you look at the overall spending, again, I think it's if you include Porro and Kulusevski making those deals permanently. But I think the Spurs probably spent more than Arsenal over the course of this season. But again, very young average ages. They've both got the same average age, Spurs and Arsenal, of 25 of the squad, which is the joint third youngest in the Premier League. The first team average is slightly younger in Arsenal. It's 24.7 to 24.9 of Postecoglou's. I guess for now, for Postecoglou, it's about those early building blocks. It's about showing the growth. It's about building for the years to come. I think his issue, obviously, is he's having to do it amid the backdrop of a fan base that has been starved of trophies, of a club where there's frustrations at the inability of the hierarchy within Spurs to connect with the fans and kind of judge the mood and understand things. And it's led to this very frustrated, I would say quick to judge fan base, but then all football fan bases are like that. I don't think there's many out there that have patience, especially ones that feel like they should be doing better than they are. Again, I guess it's key of whether they are doing better than you believe they should have been. I'm trying to think back to what I would have predicted at the start of the season, especially after Kane departed, what I think. I'd imagine, this is just me, I could be wrong. Feel free to look it up, see what I've said and tell me I'm wrong. I would imagine that I would have expected a season of 5th or 6th to try to rebuild a completely different team. So many of the personnel are different, and obviously without your club's greatest ever goal scorer, I guess, what he is, the numbers say he is. Or highest ever goal scorer. It depends how you want to see it. Some people from the old school really don't like him called the greatest ever goal scorer. But yeah, it's there's a lot of work to do. Postecoglou now, I guess it's about making sure this was just a blip in the road, and that because there is a lot of the people I think that was so angry this week were probably quiet last week rather than kind of praising what Spurs did, and that's, I guess, another sad aspect of football fandom. Like I say, almost waiting for something to go wrong, which is sad because we all want the best for Tottenham Hotspur. We want, we want them to be, I guess, I was going to say back to where they were, but some of us are not old enough to really know when they're at their greatest. I was not around in the 60s. Certainly was not, despite how white this is. But yeah, Postecoglou was asked after the game whether he felt it was one step forward, one step back, a little bit like Sonny said, and he said No, it's more like 4 steps forward, 1 step back. If we go 1 step forward, 1 step back, we'd be more like 18th position. He laughed at a Sky Sports reporter who asked if the result might be a dent to the club's top 4 hopes. He said, yeah, look, it's all over. We'll just go for 6th. I mean, what am I meant to say to that? We're 2 points behind Villa. There's 10 games to go. There's so much football to be played. If we'd have won today, nothing is guaranteed. If we'd have lost last weekend, nothing is guaranteed. There's 10 games to play, so I don't worry about that stuff. I never have. It's not about just falling into a place in the ladder. We could finish 4th, great, and everyone's happy, brilliant. It's nothing that hasn't been done at this football club before. It's about how we play. That's all I'm interested in. We were disappointing today, and we learned from that, and we move forward, and we tackle the next game. I do think he's maybe slightly underplaying the aspect of if you were to finish in the top 4 and getting the Champions League, there is a feel-good factor to it. There is a real motivational boost behind the scenes. We saw it in the summer after Conte did it. The club was absolutely buzzing, but it all went wrong. And again, I know that's what Postecoglou will say. He'll like, oh yeah, well done. You're all happy for a summer. It's like, that's not a long-term growth thing. So I get it. I do understand where he's coming from, and I do think he's slightly overplaying it, but I do also understand what he means about get 4th if you've deserved it and are growing, ready to accommodate what comes next. Don't just get it for the sake of sneaking into the Champions League in 4th, or if it is 5th. Even that's... We await to see what happens with that, because obviously the UEFA coefficients were helped by a good Thursday night for English teams, but then the draws made it a bit of a tricky one as well, because you've got Arsenal playing a German team in Bayern, you've got West Ham playing Leverkusen as well, so they're 2 crunch fixtures. City, who you would have expected to probably maybe go on and win the Champions League, have been given the toughest possible probably game they could have had in terms of Real, who are just a bit of a machine in the Champions League at times. So yeah, we await to see exactly how that works. But again, it's like Postecoglou's not going to be whooping and cheering if Spurs get in the back doorway to the Champions League. He wants to see growth. And I think that's the key thing to take away from this, is that he will have been as disappointed with Spurs as everyone else was yesterday. With a Spurs heart, he's not. It's not like he's dismissing that. He's saying that yes, it was rubbish, but for him, at the moment, is a case study of like one. There's been difficult, disappointing moments within games, but this was the first game where as a whole, it just stank, and it really did. He laughed in the press conference. Again, there was one reporter asked about the international break. He was asked about whether it was a good time or a bad time to have the international break, and it was just like, I don't know how to answer that. It was there, it's in the calendar. He is getting a little bit exasperated, which I'd imagine he probably has done at times in other clubs, and it's no different. But yeah, I guess this line of questioning about the top 4 isn't something he's had to deal with before. It's a very Premier League thing, isn't it? This top 4 race. I guess it goes all the way back to Arsene Wenger and then saying top 4 is like a trophy and stuff like that, which clearly Postecoglou does not agree with. And I guess he's using all of this, and every time it comes up, to try to shape different mentality within the club, and maybe if he can with the fan base, but I don't think that's as important for him. Definitely, like speaking to people within the club, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to get out of this mentality and get the staff out of this mentality around the club, not just coaching staff, everyone and the players, that like, oh yeah, let's try to get 4th. Wouldn't that be great for us? It's to build something so much more than that. It's to build something that next season is one that he wants to challenge. He wants to challenge at the top next season. He doesn't just want to say, let's get 4th and consolidate that. He wants to be a team that is strong enough to really have a go at the big boys. And I said it earlier that they haven't lost to Liverpool, Arsenal, United, teams like that this season. Arsenal, did I say that? Liverpool, Arsenal, United, City. I knew there was another team. It is against the other teams where they've messed up. So you tweak that team, you grow that team, you build that team to be able to play that way against the big boys. Admittedly, against Liverpool, they were tad lucky. But you tweak that mentality and attitude and the quality within the squad, and then you're picking up those points. How many times do we all do that brain-wrecking thing of saying, oh, if only Spurs had not messed up late at Molineux. If only they hadn't messed up in this game. If only they'd scored a couple of those goals late on against Brighton. And, you wonder all the what-ifs kind of thing. And I think if he's allowed to do what he wants to do and grow this team, you are going to see his version of Tottenham. I get the frustrations about they're too open at times. I get the frustrations about they allow too many shots at goal. But what Postecoglou will say is, yeah, that's great. But what you're seeing is not the proper Postecoglou team yet. You're not seeing the team that knows exactly how to ensure those things don't happen. Yes, you will give up the odd chance because of the high line, but ultimately, most of the time, that ball should be constantly in and around the opposition area, and they should be penned in, and it should be, in his words, relentless. That in itself cuts down the amount of opportunities the opposition have. They try to counter, and you play them offside, or you have a pacey defender like a Van der Ven to mop it up behind. Yeah, they're all going to have to get over this disappointing derby. It's a very young coaching staff as well. They're going to have to work to get more consistency out of the team. Like I say, playing better for longer periods of matches rather than little moments within matches. And yeah, it's just really annoying that this international break has come when it has. I do think the Villa result against West Ham has helped Spurs a bit. Again, Postecoglou will say, I don't care. I don't care about other teams helping us. It's funny, isn't it? He's trying to get us out of this, and myself included, this mindset of trying to finish in a certain rung in the ladder. Whereas for him, that's almost secondary this season. It's about building. I get it, but I don't think I'll ever be able to get my brain away from that, because it is. As a fan, you want to be finishing higher up the table. You do. It's a natural thing. It's almost alien to try and take that out of it. I think kind of you have to see it as both. You have to see growth while also finishing as high up the table as you possibly can. I think that's just natural football thinking. But yeah, we've got this break now, which is an absolute pain in the backside. You're just going to have to hope that with 2-3 days to prepare for the Luton game, that they're kind of on it. It's, again, this could be absolutely jinxing it, but it is the kind of game on paper you would want to come back to. A team that has scored a lot of goals. I think they've scored more goals than Man United in the Premier League this season, Luton. But obviously, they concede a lot of goals as well. So, Spurs, if they want to really show the fans essentially an apology in football terms, that's the game to go out there and really sell it and go for it. Because, you do that, and then you've got the trip to West Ham, which is not going to be easy. They are going to have to play a certain level in that. They cannot go there and play the way they did against Fulham, otherwise they're going to get turned over again. Then you've got Nuno's return to Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, was Forest come. And then, of course, that early kick-off at Newcastle, which just is rubbish. Home game against Man City after that will now be moved because they're through to the FA Cup semi-finals. You've got that and the game at Stamford Bridge that have got to be fitted in somewhere. You'd imagine one of those will be in the final week of the season before the Sheffield United game. But look, it is a long way to go. 10 matches to be played. Much to be learned, I think, about this new version of Tottenham Hotspur and just how much it's got to grow under Postecoglou. He's made no bones about it. Even when they've won and maybe we've all got a little bit carried away, he's continuously said how much is still to be done in this team and how they're nowhere near what he wants them to be yet. If this was a kind of a really jarring bump in the road and it's going to annoy people, it's going to frustrate people, it certainly did that to me. Just that journey back from trekking across from the other side of London, it's just like, ugh, after a game like that. Whereas getting the train back from, Villa Park, it was just like you're buzzing all the way back. But it is got to be seen as just a bump in the road at this moment in time. Because it has still, for me, been a season of development. It has, with everything that went on in the summer and, the horrendous mess Spurs were in at the end of last season. They had, Postecoglou was their fourth coach within, 5 months. They did lose their best player at the start of the season. They have had to create a team in a very different way, a very different style, a massive rebuild. And I guess myself included, we've got to understand that you'll have days like this, and however rubbish it feels. And he's just got to get them back on track quickly, as quickly as he can. Maybe going away on an international break, getting their head out of the space is a good thing. Personally, I'd always rather have another game straight away, but that's just the way I see it. Yeah. We need to see much more than that, because it was rubbish. It was. What else we've got to talk about? Spurs got a post-season friendly. That is, I think that's going to be officially announced early this week. That is going to be in Melbourne, as previously mooted. They're going to play Newcastle United, May the 22nd at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Very much, I think, a kind of fly-in, fly-out type thing almost. Maybe a training session in a game, I think, something like that. Not long there. People asking why. I think we probably know why. I'd imagine there's a lucrative aspect to it. There's a helping build the fan base further in Australia with Postecoglou at the helm. Although I did see someone want to tweet it out earlier saying, I hope he's not the manager at that point. It's just a card. My brain cannot handle that already. Is it ideal for the players? No. Will the players be absolutely delighted about it? No, I'd imagine not. Doing that Sheffield United game and then pretty much having to, I'd imagine they'll fly quite quickly straight after that to Melbourne. But yeah, one game. I'm guessing it probably was dependent on whether Newcastle beat City, because obviously they would then be in FA Cup final or FA Cup semi-final action, which could have taken them into the final. Of course, that's the way semi-finals work. But yeah, it's it's great for the people of Melbourne to see Spurs players. There's a lot this week, especially, been made of tourist fans. Plastic fans was the term put to Postecoglou, which he absolutely shot down, and quite rightly so, saying, look, hey, I'm a plastic tourist fan then. I loved the Premier League as a kid, but I lived on the other side of the world. Can only see them when I can. So yeah, I don't know if you can kind of complain about tourists being in the ground and then complain about clubs going over to those other countries so those tourists can then watch those matches. Yeah, I don't know if you can kind of complain at both. I don't know. But yes, it is ultimately about the money, I suppose, isn't it? And I guess if it is more funds towards the transfer coffers, then maybe not the worst thing in the world. But it's not ideal for some of those players. It'd be interesting to see how many go. I presume it would be all of them. They don't normally go straight off on international duty. It will cut in. Normally they have like a week off or week or two off before an international tournament. Obviously with the Euros and the Copa America this summer. So it is cutting into that. It's not ideal. But yeah, it's an interesting one. Let's put it that way. And then obviously you'll have Spurs coming back in the summer for a friendly in Scotland, and then the Asian tour, 3 games in Asia, 2 of those in South Korea. I wouldn't imagine it'll be too long until we get confirmation on exactly where the other game will be as well. And yeah, I'd imagine that won't be the end of the friendlies. I'd imagine there'll be maybe one more as well, if not another. But yeah, we'll see. That's a long way to go. There's got these 10 games to get out of the way first. I know it's disappointing. Trust me, I was as disappointed as anyone else. I was in a foul mood, really, as I had to write my stuff. That's the irony, isn't it? I admitted, didn't I, last week in my Q&A in the last video, that the Villa game, I actually did kind of a little kind of mini punch like that as it was the first goal, or it was Brennan Johnson's goal, went in. It serves me right. Don't get emotionally connected, Alistair. And I don't know why I'm referring to myself in the third person, because Spurs will only crush that connection in the very next game. We'll, as always, try to do a midweek video this week. We'll have maybe the financial results to talk about potentially, which will be very interesting, especially after the season ticket controversy of the last week or two. And yeah, Spurs probably will give a little bit more clarity to how much they spent in the summer. I'm sure they'll shove that in there, even though technically it's not part of those club accounts. And yeah, we'll see what else comes up with. We'll get this officially confirmed, the Melbourne game, and whether we get any more pre-season stuff, we'll see. But yeah, so deflating, isn't it? It is. It's amazing how one game can affect a mood so much. That's football, though. That is the beauty of football. It can leave you on the biggest high and it can chuck you down to the lowest low, all with pretty much the kick of a ball. It's incredible. But yeah, very disappointing. But they need to come back and get straight back on track against Luton in a couple of weeks' time at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Right, I'm going to head off now, try and watch everything else apart from anything football related for this evening and maybe for the next couple of days. International break, I'm not really that fussed about. I might watch odd bits and pieces of stuff to see how some of the Spurs players are playing, but I just don't care enough right now. I don't mind when it gets to the tournaments, but when it's at this stage of the season, it's just like, great, yeah, well done, lads. But yeah, right, time to head off because I am sinking into more of a kind of morose mood, and I don't want to be in that. I want to have a nice Sunday evening. And apologies if I ruin your Sunday evening, if it wasn't already ruined by Saturday. But yeah, I will speak to you later in the week. As always, stay healthy, stay safe, look after yourselves. I shall catch you later. Goodbye.